Hey, y'all, welcome back to a Friday, August 9th, 2024 edition here on the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ. We've got a fun show for you guys today. We got 247 Sports national recruiting analyst Cooper Petagna on here to talk all things Tennessee Vols recruiting. This was a lot of fun with Cooper talking about the latest Vols big time commit in 2026 quarterback at North Carolina, Faizon Brandon, and what he brings to that class early on and what he means for Tennessee as they continue to just stack big time blue chip quarterback after blue chip quarterback here in the Heupel era heading into year 4. We talk about the succession plan behind Nico over the next 2 years at quarterback for the Vols. Cooper's favorite sneaky 2025 ball commits that he likes a lot, and then revisiting James Pearce's high school tape and why he's blossomed and what it looked like based on what coming out of high school and him becoming maybe the best edge rusher in college football now for the Vols. So all that and more coming up next here with Cooper and all things Vols. So don't forget, folks, before we dive into today's episode, that you can watch this show on YouTube, youtube.com/Chase Thomas Podcast, full episodes, shorts, clips, all that good stuff over on our YouTube channel as we're well over 2,000 subscribers there, growing more and more each and every day. So if you love to watch your podcast, you can do so with the daily Chase Thomas Podcast over on YouTube, youtube.com/Chase Thomas Podcast. So like and subscribe there today. You can also listen to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or however you get your podcast. If you're an audio listener and you've not already done so, make sure you hit that subscribe button on your preferred podcast player, but also leave us a 5-star rating and write us a review. It helps other people find the show, and it helps this very show continue to grow. So if you take care of that today, I would greatly appreciate it. You can learn more about the show, chasethomaspodcast.com, for all of my past episodes, information, all that good stuff, chasethomaspodcast.com today. And you can email me at chasethomaspodcast@gmail.com. All right, Uncle Darren, let's go.
The Chase Thomas Podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, we're back here on the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm joined by a first-timer, one of my favorite recruiting minds in the industry. He is known as the Big Ten recruiting insider, because when you go through his page, you're like, oh, Pac-12? No, he's the Big Ten guy. Cooper, do you feel like you look at this and you're like, wow, the teams that I was doing some real recruiting stuff for, they're in the Big Ten now. That's not a Pac-12 thing. Isn't that kind of weird?
I didn't even think about that. That's the first time anybody's ever associated me with the Big Ten. But I guess Washington, Oregon,
Yeah.
essentially, yeah, I guess I'm a Big Ten guy now. I went to LSU, grew up in the SEC. I was always an SEC guy, but first time I've heard it. So I guess I'll try to get used to it.
I'm just trying to get you ready for when you're doing other hits this fall and everything, and they're like a lot of experience in the Big Ten and the recruiting department. You're like, when was I in the Big Ten? Oh, right, they're all in the Big Ten now. So I guess I'm a Big Ten veteran.
You thinking ahead, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, Cooper, I'm really grateful to have you on here today because, look, I think all eyes are on Tennessee 9 days from now with David Sanders' upcoming recruitment, the 5-star offensive tackle out of Charlotte, that Tennessee's obviously been in on for a really long time in the final 3 of Nebraska and Ohio State. And that's going to be a big one, maybe just the biggest one for this cycle. But what's also happening is the 2026 class with Faizon Brandon jumping in the boat and Tennessee stacking, like you and Andrew were talking about it this week, of just what's unique about what Heupel and the staff has done is just stacking these quarterbacks. Georgia had it a little bit with Brock Vandagriff, Gunnar Stockton, Carson Beck and company a few years ago. But I mean, Brock Vandagriff obviously moving on to Kentucky now, and it's just hard to pull this off, what Heupel has pulled off to this point. My first question to you, how would you best explain how the Vols have evolved as a staff, recruiting from how they identified talent, how they recruited guys when Heupel and company first came in January of 2021, to what you're seeing now on the trail for the Vols?
We've gotten better and better every year. I think, that's the biggest thing. When Josh Heupel came to Knoxville, I don't think there were a lot of people really kind of doubting his offensive prowess. I know for me, the biggest question mark was, all right, everything that he's done on field with his previous stops, which included some places like Oklahoma and obviously UCF, can can that match on the recruiting trail?
Mm,
And I think what they've done, it's something that I always look for. When you're coming off a successful season like they had 2 years ago, it's really important to capitalize on the recruiting trail.
mm,
And they've done that. I think we talked about it on the show, just talking about, the run they've had here with Nico and Jake Merklinger. Now you get George McIntyre and Faizon, in a world in college football in the FBS, especially in the Power Four, where over 50%. I think that number is closer to 60% of starters in the Power Four are transfer portal quarterbacks.
mm.
It's very difficult to come by. So he's done a tremendous job, not only offensively, and I think a lot of people gravitate towards quarterback. I love what they've done at the skill position. I can't wait to see that group kind of mature over the next 2 years. Obviously, been really aggressive on the offensive line. They bring over Lance Hurd from LSU. Like their offensive line class this year. You just mentioned David Sanders. It's a lot like the NFL model, right? When you're bringing in these type of franchise arms, you want to be able to protect them and surround them with everything that they need to be successful. So a lot of people talk about offense. I really like what they've done defensively as well. So this is not just a team that's going to try to beat you one way. I think they've kind of um, learned, I think early on, that they were going to have to be a lot more aggressive, not only in the talent ID, but the talent acquisition side. And they've done that at all three levels. So I'm excited about this year, but I'm really kind of excited about this year and beyond of what Tennessee can be, because now I think it's, Josh Heupel, his staff have established themselves. And I think the market you're starting to see is reflecting that. There's no questions about this program or where this program is heading.
And I think it's interesting because like when he got hired, I was definitely one of the Tennessee folks who was like, probably I was really intrigued by the Dan Mullen aspect to it, and I don't think that would have been well received and not a real option. But and then he gets the comparisons obviously to Lincoln Riley as the quarterback whisperer on the East Coast here, and I think those two will always just be kind of connected in that regard, just with the Oklahoma connections, this, that, and the other, and their offensive philosophy and just what they've done with quarterbacks. But what I think is most interesting, you kind of hit on this with Heupel through 4 years, and I'm interested if you've noticed that too, is Heupel, I think, I mean, he didn't go the Grantham route, and he didn't go the, why am I blanking on who they just let go this past year? Alex Grinch, USC, is that Heupel, I think, understood early on, and maybe something that was overlooked, was that he understood his limitations, and he was like, I'm going to have my guys, like he's promoting from within. Like I'm writing about this week, is all of Tennessee's offensive staff outside of Glenn Ellerby is under 40 years old. Everybody, like he promotes from within. When guys like Golish leave, he believes in his offensive analyst. He promoted Al Gablin, who it's turned out to be it was a big gamble at the time, but it's turned out to be a big hit with Desan Brame and Jack Van Dorselaer coming in the boat, Carson Snead for 2026. But on the defensive side, it's all vets. Like he brings in William Inge, Brian John Marie, who was really good here. He goes to Michigan. He comes in. He's like, all right, I'll just go get the co-DC from Washington. A bunch of experience, Iowa guy, tough as nails. Like he's going to come in, and it, by all accounts, has been great. And that's just someone else to help Tim Banks. Tim Banks, obviously, a lot of experience actually with Butch Jones and Penn State and where he came from there. That's a defensive guy, and the scoring defense has gotten better every single season under Tim Banks at Tennessee. Rodney Gardner, obviously the SEC ties, and that speaks for itself. Willie Martinez, another guy who just extensive Tennessee ties too, but also SEC ties, and has been a good recruiter for Tennessee. They're all vets. So I look at what Heupel has done. I think what separates him from a lot of these young offensive minds in the sport, and I think he doesn't get enough credit for, is he's identified his weaknesses, and I think he's surrounded himself with guys that are going to help offset what he brings to the table. Because I mean, it's hard to get good defensive minds, right, to be the defensive coaches for this kind of offensive style. That's going to be tempo based. That's going to score a lot of points, and your defense is just going to, by the nature of the offense, be on the field a lot and give up a lot of yards and that sort of thing. So do you think that's fair to kind of look at it that way with Heupel, and something that I think national folks might overlook with him?
Yeah, for sure. You talking about that, obviously have an in-depth knowledge of the program and what they brought in. The William Inch hire was interesting, coming over
Mm,
from Washington. But what they've done, I've always thought, at least my personal philosophy, going back to when I used to work in collegiate personnel, I thought the most important trait for a head coach to be successful over a sustainable period is to have just a high level of social awareness and program awareness
Mm,
is what I call it. Where are you kind of in the world of the college football hierarchy? Where are you in the SEC? What does that look like? What are the things that you need to address year in and year out? I think so many people kind of take uh, a very generic and a very kind of cookie cutter, vantage point to it. But the game changes every year. I just left the personnel symposium this week here in Nashville, and the things that these guys have to deal with year in and year out, like the 85 scholarships expanding to 105 scholarships. That's a big deal. That's a big question mark for a lot of these programs that are going to try to figure out how to navigate that. On top of the fact that they're going to have to deal with the revenue share
mm,
next year as well. So I bring all of that up to say it is so important to have forward-thinking coaches that are innovative, but can also anticipate as well. And that's just not to say, all right, how's the game going to change from a schematic standpoint? How's the game going to change from a roster construction standpoint? But how's the game going to change in terms of the people that I surround myself with and being able to take a really close examination of that year in and year out? And, offensively, it's never been the question, but defensively, in terms of what they've done and what they've been able to add, I think Josh Heupel knows if he can continue to improve that unit year over year, they're going to be one of the most, I would say, just testy teams over
mm,
time that can contend in a 12-team playoff. And by that time of the year, the 12-team playoff, like when I think of which programs nationally that helps the most, I don't think anybody would want to see a team like Tennessee the way that they are built from an offensive standpoint. You insert a guy like Nico. We talked about the three young arms under him as well, and then have a defense that's opportunistic enough and has guys like Pierce. I mentioned the edge rushers, and I've heard rave reviews about Jordan Ross already, but the stuff that they've done on the back end. So I love the DNA and really kind of the identity that they're trying to build there.
In terms of the quarterbacks, what is Tennessee getting in Faizon? What do you think's who do you think is the closest comp for him based on what you've seen and heard? And then how does the succession plan unfold? Because I mean, here this week in Tennessee, the fan fiction is already out of control, Cooper. Like the fan fiction of how this is going to go over the next 4 to 5 years is absolutely bonkers. But it's great because it's optimistic. It's like it's one of those things where it feels good that you can have this kind of fan fiction where like, wow, we have this great 8-year window of succession plan here with all of our quarterbacks and we're set. But as you know, it doesn't really work like that in college football. But what do you make of Faizon and how this succession plan is ultimately going to unfold in your estimation?
Well, I think ultimately, I guess I'll take a different route here, but if you're going to be the number one player in the country, or similar to what Nico was, right there with Arch 1 and 2, and I'm sure people got varying opinions on that. But if you're going to be that type of player, held in that type of regard, more and more for us, you got to be wired the right way.
Mm,
And I think when you look at Faison Brandon from a physical toolkit standpoint, I think it was very easy to get on board with him just in terms of what he offers, not only from a prototypical height, weight, but the arm talent as well. And then you look at him first year as a starter, 13-1, over 3,000 yards, really clean touchdown to INT ratio, took care of the ball. Got to see him in Atlanta work out at the Elite 11 regionals. Got to see him work out at the Future 50 in Tampa. I like the maturity. I like the way that he handles himself. I like the competitiveness. He's I wouldn't say quiet, but there's a maturity beyond his years, and that's important. The other thing, he's a puppy, man. He's young for his grade. He's only
hmm
16, and our job is have to constantly remind people when it comes to education and the rankings, we're projecting these guys out to what we think their NFL draft potential is going to be.
mm,
So Faison Brandon simply is a player and a human being that we feel like we can grow with. When we put him number one, we felt like, all right, is this going to be a guy that we're going to have to constantly check in on and say, all right, there's an issue here, or maybe there's a gap in terms of what we're seeing. The sophomore year was incredibly strong. We let the multi-sport background average almost 10 plus points on the hardwood. But for him to have the type of production that he had, and then to really kind of see him this offseason and then really understand that, wow, this guy is just starting to put it together. So when I say you're like growing with the guy, We expect him to take another leap as a junior. There's another leap that he'll take as a senior. And then once he gets to college and has that type of development and that coaching from Josh Heupel, that's what gets you excited about it, right? You're projecting this guy over 4 or 5 years. So, there was no shortage of convictions when it came to Faizon Brandon, putting him number one. And we ultimately, at the end of the day, I think feel really, really, really good about that outlook and what that's going to look like. Now, in terms of how the room's going to shake out, it's a really good problem to have. You got 4 quarterbacks right now between Nico, Jake, George, and Faizon. And, I would imagine Nico, I think Nico is going to take college football by storm. I think the thing with Nico, people are going to look at him. He's pretty interesting. I always comped him to, Justin Herbert frame with Bryce Young pocket awareness and presence. His ability to escape, avoid, create time in the pocket and outside of the pocket is really unique. And I don't think he gets enough credit for that. I think a lot of people are going to be floored by just the pure overall arm talent. But his ingenuity in terms of being a creative playmaker in the pocket is pretty special. So I say all that to say Nico's probably 2 and done, right? Best case scenario. But there's always a case. Maybe we're dealing with a Quinn Ewers situation and he comes back, or and then you got Faizon, who would be a freshman after that.
And a young freshman, as you pointed out.
And a young freshman. And the thing is like Merklinger wasn't this super traitsy cat coming out. And when I saw him work out live, to be frank, I thought he left a little bit to be desired from a physical arm talent standpoint. But you go back to the tape, there's so much that he does that you like playing within the system, keeping things on time, staying ahead of the sticks. You saw how successful Tennessee was with a guy like Hendon Hooker. You can understand why Josh Heupel would like a guy like Merklinger. Then there's McIntyre. And McIntyre is obviously, I think anybody who kind of studies our rankings knows, we had him high. We moved off of him. Now a guy in our 3rd round in terms of our projections. He's a really interesting dude, just in terms of what we've seen, like 11-13 win-loss on the field. We really liked the tape. We bet on the traits early. He was this long kid. The arm talent was there. And then I saw him over the offseason, and it was just a little bit more of a gap than what we thought between the tape and between the projection long-term. Now, that doesn't say that he doesn't have it. He looks more like a basketball player that's going to have to get in that weight room, add some weight to his frame. And I think, a little bit more of a developmental guy than we thought. But honestly, he's stepping into a good situation where he can grow it organically. So do I know how it's going to shake out? I don't. But I know Tennessee's going to be in a good spot. And then you have, you got Faizon there, year 1. Who knows what he looks like over the next 2 years? Like I said, we expect him to take a leap there. But I also, we're getting down the line. You want one of Merklinger and McIntyre to emerge. But if that's not the case, I wouldn't rule out like Tennessee going in, grabbing a 1-year rental and saying, all right, we're just going to put a Band-Aid over this and then we'll kind of see what it looks like. So I know you asked another question there. I'm sorry. I know this is long-winded, but in terms of Faizon, in terms of the comp, Andrew Ivins and I kind of went back and forth on this a little bit. He saw a little bit of Geno Smith, and I think there's some stuff there just in terms of Geno's probably a little bit better of an athlete than you would think, just in terms of his ability to extend plays. Now, is he somebody that you have to game plan for and respect as a runner in the NFL? No, I think he could give you a little bit more of that in college. I think that's going to be Faizon as well. And then when you see Faizon, quick release, compact, explosive arm, and the other thing is just his ability to kind of play within himself, but like he's not a statue either. Can play off platform, get the ball out from a variety of angles. So I think that kind of like arm talent package is only going to continue to expand the more that we see of him. So, but yeah, Geno was a name that came up. I don't know if there's like a clean comp for him where you're like, yeah, that's kind of what I see.
And Geno was, like you said, a really, really good college player. And I mean, he's evolved. Like, he's actually one of the best stories in the NFL over the last few years. I mean, if you look at some of the all 22 of Geno the last 2 years in Seattle, like he's throwing absolute darts. Like he's throwing guys open. Like he deserves a lot of credit for evolving and just not giving up in the NFL and just becoming more of a prototypical passer. I mean, Geno is good and probably one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the NFL right now. Who's your favorite commit in the 2025 class right now for Tennessee? Who in the boat right now? Who's your favorite?
Yeah, I was going through today. I mean, honestly, man, there are a lot of guys. I try to do this. I think anytime that we talk about commitments, try to talk about guys outside of the top 247 a little bit. So I'm going to cheat. There's a guy on the back end that I like.
Mm,
I've long been a fan of the Nick Moore kid.
mm,
He's a guy that I think ultimately at the end of the day is probably going to be pegged at center. That's what he's
yeah.
going to be, but he's going to be a darn good one. We had 6'2.5", 290 plus, two-way snaps, long for his size. What I mean by that, the arm length that we got, 34.5. Probably even if it's like 33 and three quarters, you really like that a lot. And for that scheme, what they want to do and have them be able to play, in a zone scheme, play up at the second level. They mix and match, do a lot of things in the run game. Like I like this kid.
Mm,
I like the tenacity. I like the competitive temperament. Really, really good position blocker too. Plays with really good quickness, balanced body control, never out of position. Love the timing with the hands as well. So I like him. Van Dorsler's a kid. Like, if you get into 12 personnel a little bit as your second tight end, you can see how him and Brain kind of play off each other.
mm.
But he's a well-rounded kid. Like, these are the type of guys that are multi-positional, can play him out of the backfield. You can flex him out. You can put him in line. They end
So
up
there's some
going,
Princeton Fant there, maybe a little bit with Van Dorsey.
yeah,
Maybe.
this guy could, he could have a Sunday career because of the position flex, and he'll never be the guy.
Yeah.
But he's indispensable in some schemes, right? So Douglas Utu, another dude,
Mm.
could end up being a right tackle, could end up being a guard. I mean, honestly, you could probably sell me at center, but I think he's a technician, super polished, coming out of that program. Like the guys that they've taken on the offensive line are all pretty interesting in the fact that they all do a lot of different things. I think, Moore is probably the one guy you pencil into a center spot. Even the Ogamoro kid,
Mm.
like we don't have enough information currently to call whether or not he's going to be a tackle or a guard, but I really like his skill set at guard. So they've done a good job there, man. And all guys that, from a height, weight, speed standpoint, there's a lot to like.
Yeah, I mean, the last two classes, I think Glenn Ellerby and company have really figured it out, right? Like these two, I mean, and we'll see what happens with David Sanders. But it kind of speaks to what I've wondered is when like talking to more just analytical guys in terms of what they see with schematically with Tennessee's offense, that guard and center play is maybe more important than tackles. And I mean, that's kind of one of the underrated parts of the last couple of years with Tennessee is I think people always wonder about who's going to protect Nico, the blind side, who was going to protect Joe last year. I mean, Gerald Mincey actually graded out better than John Campbell when he was in the field. Like Gerald Mincey was he was serviceable as left tackle. You had Dane Davis, who's a former walk-on, and he's been able to flip and be okay. I think because of the tempo and because of the style, I think Tennessee's always going to be okay at tackle. Like I'm excited about Lance Hurd. I think he'll be solid over the next 2 years in that spot. I think Campbell will be solid at right tackle. But I just don't really worry about that. I think Tennessee just really hasn't had that problem to this point in Heupel's scheme, and I just don't think they really ever will. And you look at the Georgia game where they got blitz. Part of it was just Hendon's doing these one-step drops, and Jalen Carter's getting doubled in the interior, and they didn't have an answer. And I think that's one of the things where, to me, it kind of makes me and should make Tennessee fans more excited. Is Heupel and the staff is stacked a lot of interior guys that I think could all pop, and I think it seems like interior guys are more important, and getting those hits there is more important than the tackle spot, even though the tackles get more of the attention. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's interesting in the fact that also, like, I mean, you look at the SEC and from an opponent standpoint, I mean, the last thing that especially with quarterbacks, the one thing where you don't want to disrupt them in this offense is you don't want the interior penetration, right?
Mm,
So I think obviously they put a big emphasis on that in the passing game. But the other thing is, like, I think about Lance Hurd. Lance Hurd's going to have to step it up from a pass protection standpoint, but this offense kind of protects him from that. The other thing about him, he's got a 7 foot plus wingspan. You got a similar dude on the other side with Campbell. Those guys just in terms of width and length are going to be hard to get around. But in the run game, um, running off tackle, I think Lance Hurd is going to be a big plus. I have a hard time, man, not seeing that guy getting some first round interest. Obviously, we're really,
Mhm.
really high on him coming out. Even the, less than 200 snaps he played last year, I went back, I watched every one, invested in those guys and in him, but big fan of him and his progress. And, if it wasn't for Will Campbell and Emory Jones, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he'd be there. And I get that he don't want to play guard either. The guy that I want to mention is Marion Dye.
Hmm.
Huge fan. It's kind of interesting because he doesn't have crazy production in terms of the sacks and the TFLs, but you got to dig into the tape. And Jordan Ross was a guy who only had 2.5 sacks at Vestavia Hills as a
Hmm.
junior. And I remember talking to our team here and just saying, hey, you got to dig into the tape to understand the impact that this guy's having on the field.
Hmm.
And Dye's a guy that's very, similar in terms of the way that he moves to a guy like Jordan Ross, but very different in terms of, where they are physically. Like Jordan Ross was 218, 220 going into his senior year.
Hmm.
Marion Dye is about 268. So what this guy can do in terms of the length, in terms of the get off, the explosiveness, speed to power, we got him at 110 right now. But if there was like a dude you were looking at in the class to be like, all right, you could potentially attach a rocket ship to his back, it'd be this kid. So the other thing is like I'm rambling here. Everybody loves to talk quarterback, dude, but you got Pierce, you
Hmm.
got Ross, and you got Dye. The lineage
Yeah.
here over the next couple years of
Caleb
pass
Herring
rushers.
too.
And yeah, that Herring, I knew I was missing one. Freaky dudes.
Hmm.
Guys that I think are not just good pass rushers, but guys that I think are going to be day one, day two draft picks.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tennessee is just they're so loaded at the Leo spot. I mean, you look around the country, I think it's hard to find. Like, I think obviously a lot of people look at Georgia, but Georgia doesn't have the Leos that I think Tennessee's stacking. And I like obviously Tennessee's getting a lot of attention for how they're stacking the quarterbacks, but the Leo spot, like they're also just not losing these guys because Gardner rotates so much, and these guys are going to play, and they're those third down passing downs, obvious passing downs, when they get that three Leos on the field at the same time, like it's just there aren't many better pass rush options, I think, in the country than what Tennessee's gonna be able to, when healthy, rotate through. Because I mean, Joshua Josephs, I think, is poised for a big year, and that kind of leads to my final question here, Cooper. Is one of the more interesting developments. Obviously, you're seeing James Pearce, who we talked about here. He's being looked at as a potential top 10 guy. Like some mocks this offseason have had him number one overall. When you go back and think about how you saw Pierce out of high school 3 years ago, did you see this level of upside? Did you have like what have you seen post high school Pierce that has just been like, oh, this was like the best case scenario and this was always in the cards? Or did you think even at the time you're like, I didn't think he'd be the best Leo in the country at one point. I think he could be good, but I didn't know he would actually be this good where he's unblockable and he's running a 4.4 pick sixes and just like an absolute beast on defense.
If we knew he was as good as he is, we would have had him ranked a lot higher,
Yeah.
And credit to our friends over there at On Three. I think they were, they were the outlier on him, had him high, but we liked him. We went back and we kind of wanted to make sure that we're buttoned up, and I think we had him top 180. I think at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, which when you go back, I wish we were kind of more convicted on so much of what we do is an information game.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is, like I said, like with Faizon, you're projecting these guys not only out over their junior and their senior year, but 3-4 years into college. It's 5-6 years that you're doing that. So the information is important. And I'll bring this back to James, but like everything that I mentioned about Faizon was, I got to see him twice this
Mm-hmm.
offseason before he's even played his junior year.
Yeah.
So just even seeing the subtleties, the little things that you pick up on, and with James, I think there was very little exposure to him, not only live as a high school player, but in the off-season combines that have become so important to us, not just from a testing standpoint, but like when you go to Future 50, you get to see good on good, get to see what that's like. I remember, Will Campbell versus Walter Nolan. Like you can't find that anywhere else. Saw Francis Mauigoa, Caden Green, like you get to feel which guys you want to bet on because you get to see him in a very unique environment. And with Pearce, the tape pop for sure. That was never the question. I think we were just kind of in a similar position that we currently are with Marion. We didn't really have a ton of information. We haven't seen him at any camps. We had a lot of college feedback. In terms of the recruitment, it was kind of Tennessee, and it was done. So I'm glad we got him in the top 247. If you were to tell me that, hey, that guy were to turn into a good player, I wouldn't be shocked by that. But us sitting here now, he's got a chance to go 3 and out. Only started 2-3 games last season, and he had 10 sacks. I mean, of course, I'd be surprised. So
I mean, it, like you said, it's 3 and out. I mean, top 10 pick, and I think Tennessee's gonna have a lot of these guys where they're gonna be able to rotate in and out, and as long as Rodney Gardner can stay around, just got to keep Rodney Gardner in the fold here for as long as possible. No retirement for the next 5 years for Rodney Gardner. He's got to keep this thing humming. Cooper, what can the good folks check out from you over at 247 Sports this week?
Yeah, so this week I think we're done for the week, but next week our new show just launched on CBS Network. It is a 247 Sports college football show. We're excited about that. Myself and Andrew Ivins, they'll be on 2:00 Eastern time. You can find that essentially on cable or YouTube TV, wherever you watch the CBS Sports Network. And then on Wednesdays, we have the recruiting pod, the 247 Sports Football Recruiting Pod. That will be on noon Eastern on the 247 Sports YouTube channel or wherever you find your podcast. So a little bit of college football on Monday, a little bit more recruiting on Wednesday.
I love it. Cooper, keep up the great work, sir, and we'll have to check back in again soon.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas Podcast. Hell yeah.